and humidity, or just that hot, dry air, depending on where you were located, affecting your training, we wanted to talk about a very popular topic, which is heart rate and how it could be extremely elevated or extremely low, but heart rate in relation to your training and why it's going to be more elevated, and if it is something to be concerned about or if it's just your natural state in training. One of the biggest concerns that we hear about is you feel like you're going out for an easy run, but in reality, it's actually not as easy as you think it is. So when somebody says, well, this is typically what my zone 2 is, or that aerobic base building, and they go out for a run and their heart rate is a lot higher than what it usually is, chances are there's a handful of factors going on. And just baseline, you might not be taking it as easy as you think. The first variable we want to talk about is the elephant in the room in regards to weather. Here's why weather plays a massive role in regards to your heart rate increase. On a hot and humid day, your resting heart rate and your exercising heart rate can be about 20% higher, okay? So typically, coaches will add a percentage to your training zones for the heat and humidity, and this is something you need to be careful of, because if you're not adjusting for that, then if you're trying to hit a certain pace or a certain wattage within a zone, and your heart rate spikes, now you've gone from that goal. So if it's a zone 2 or an aerobic run, not only are you utilizing less carbohydrates if you're hitting that zone, but if your heart rate spikes, now you've moved yourself into potentially a threshold area. Okay, and what that means is now you're not even getting the aerobic benefit and you're utilizing more carbohydrates, which is going to fatigue you even faster. One of the other reasons that heart rate increases during the heat and humidity or just a very hot, dry training session is because your body is trying to cool itself down. When you do sweat during that hot run, your body is going to send more blood to the skin, okay? Now, what that does is that evaporating perspiration will actually cool your skin and your blood. Your blood then moves through the body to try to regulate that core temperature, okay? High humidity will make it even more difficult for your body to cool itself because it doesn't let that sweat evaporate. So you have to keep that in mind as you're training. The second one I want a lot of people to pay attention to, and this is because it's not as popular to talk about, but it's cardiac drift. And this is just the physiological aspect of what happens when you increase that exercise and when that heart rate increases. A big misconception with this is the fact that if you run at a consistent pace, your heart rate will stay at that consistent, beat per minute the entire time. And this is a big misconception, okay? Because research shows that it is common to see your heart rate edge up and up and up about 10 to 20 beats over 30 to 45 minutes of that exercise, even if you are staying at that consistent pace, and even if you don't have any kind of increase in perceived effort. It is going to happen due to this cardiac drift. So here's what it is. When your body temperature starts to rise and you begin to lose a lot of those fluids just based on evaporation. So if you're in a dry environment, you may not realize how much you're losing. Same with swimming. A lot of people that swim don't realize how much they sweat just in the water because you can't feel that, okay? But as you lose fluids, your body starts to increase that blood flow to the skin, just like what we talked about in the humidity, in that weather aspect. But as your body struggles to maintain that core temperature, your heart has to work harder. Your heart works harder to increase that blood flow, to maintain that energy output. So that cardiac drift, cardiac output will start to happen. One big thing to remember is that this happens with everybody. It is a natural occurrence, but this is going to create that increase in your heart rate, okay? So if you're only used to running maybe 30 minutes and you go out for a 60-minute run, and you feel like you've been doing a lot of aerobic base building and you just keep pushing, that heart rate is going to spike up because your body's not necessarily used to it. So we can talk about the strength aspect, just your aerobic capacity. But all of that aside, it's going to be that cardiac drift that's going to come into play. The third thing we're going to talk about is going to be poor sleep and recovery. Okay? Now we have a ton of devices that can talk to us about how well you recovered, how well you slept. But if you're, like many people, you're not wearing your watch 24/7, okay? So we have to pay attention to, the aspects that are going to let us know if the poor sleep and poor recovery are an aspect of what's going on. So poor recovery means that your body just isn't performing as it normally is, okay? It can cause an increase in heart rate, increase in respiratory rate. It can make that easy run or easy ride or easy swim feel extremely difficult, okay? So with the poor sleep and poor recovery, that resting heart rate might be a little higher than usual, which means your starting point for exercise is going to be higher, okay? So this is something to definitely keep in mind. You have to make sure that you are sleeping enough. The recovery drinks, the recovery nutrition, all of those factors come into play. One massive thing that we have also seen in athletes and individuals that exercise is your recovery. If you're not recovering as well as you should be, you will lose alertness. You're going to lose some coordination. Your mental capacity isn't going to be where it usually is. So this is really important to keep in mind. We have a video, and we'll put the link below, that explains a lot more about recovery and what that recovery zone is actually for. Recovery is one of the biggest overlooked aspects in training. And so it's very, very important to understand the nutrition components of recovery, what the reasoning behind recovery is and why it's important. Okay, this can avoid overtraining, which we're going to get to in a little bit, because overtraining and stress play a massive role in that increased heart rate as well. Let's talk about overtraining and just overall fatigue. Okay, so this is something that as you are more experienced in exercise, you'll be able to start recognizing these, triggers or factors earlier. Now, if your resting heart rate is in the 40s or 50s, or if that's a goal of yours, it might just be in the 60s, 70s right now. But if you start to realize that you're doing a lot of exercise, not as much recovery workouts, not much tapering, and then your resting heart rate starts to increase by about 10 beats or maybe even 8 beats when you wake up and you say, you know what, something just doesn't seem right, chances are you might be overtraining. You might have that increased level of fatigue, okay? So moodiness, muscle soreness, loss of motivation. For females, it could be missing that menstrual cycle. A lot of factors come into play, like I mentioned, when we talk about overtraining, okay? So something to keep in mind, again, check out that recovery video. It's very important because paying attention to recovery and what that training zone is and what those workouts, active recovery within your workout, all of that coming into play can help you avoid these aspects. In regards to heart rate and overtraining, like I had mentioned, what's going to happen is at that resting heart rate, you'll probably see that bump, or during a warm-up, it might be your heart rate might be a little higher than what it usually is. And this is normal when we hit the point of overtraining, okay? When we were in the collegiate setting working with athletes, we used to have them jump rope. This was something they could do, without a second guess. They could basically just jump rope as a warm-up with their eyes closed. Now, fast forward, when we realized that they were slightly getting overtrained or that neuromuscular system needed that recovery time, they kept skipping, they kept hitting their feet, they kept messing up with something so simple and mindless to them. So if you start to notice certain things throughout your day, like I said, it could be just moodiness or lack of motivation. It could be something that you don't realize is associated with the training volume and intensity that you've been doing. But you have to keep in mind that this is important to pay attention to, because not only will that resting heart rate increase, but your training heart rate is going to increase. And what you're used to doing at a certain heart rate could be bumped, okay? This applies to more than just the hot, humid, dry summers of training, okay? It could be the middle of winter. It could be a beautiful day. Everything is perfect. and then you go out and that heart rate is skyrocketed, your legs feel heavy, and you just don't know what's going on. That could be fatigue, overtraining, and just increased stress. Speaking of stress, let's talk about it, okay? Your body's reaction to stress is the same regardless of where that stress is coming from, okay? So it could be work stress, it could be training stress, it could be family stress, it could be friends, that social, environmental stress. It does not matter where that stress is coming from, because even a little bit of it is going to play a big role on your heart rate, on that mental capacity, and everything that goes along with training. A lot of people use exercise as a de-stressor from a mental standpoint, but what you need to remember is, yes, you might be de-stressing on a mental side, but you're increasing the stress on the physical side. So you have to have and you have to find that nice balance between the two, okay? So another thing to remember about stress is it raises the cortisol and adrenaline levels, which can lead to that increased heart rate when running, cycling, swimming, exercising in general, okay? So the hormonal release of stress is not always positive, okay? Yes, we want healthy levels, of different hormones, but too much for too long without that recovery aspect can work in the negative effect of that heart rate increase, the moodiness, and many other factors. Again, if you're feeling that increased in stress, then one of the things I would recommend is checking out about the recovery and some of the other training tips to find out exactly, where that heart rate should be, where your wattage should be, where your pace should be. Because you might feel like you're going out for a nice, easy recovery jog, and that pace might hit that target, but your heart rate could be 20 beats higher. So again, we defeat the entire purpose of that workout. Another fun one here, fluids, okay? Dehydration. All right, there's been so many times that we've seen individuals go out for a run or post that they had, this long run and they didn't need any kind of hydration. Friends, you have to remember fluids. That is a massive aspect of thermoregulation, which helps operate the correct core temperature within your body, okay? It's not some amazing feat that you're able to go run a marathon without any hydration. The amount of damage that it's going to do to your body is going to be so much more detrimental than any kind of benefit you would get from saying, hey, look at me, I just ran a marathon without any hydration or fluids. Using water to keep your body in the correct temperature is thermoregulation. That is what it is called, okay? So if this starts to go haywire, then your organs will go haywire, okay? So it is definitely important to maintain that core temperature to allow the organs to work properly, okay? And it also helps lubricate the joints, prevent infections, removes the waste through your body, okay? So avoiding hydration in general is not smart. I will preface this. Some coaches want their athletes to do no water, no nutrition, and they have their reasonings for that. But from an increased heart rate standpoint, our topic today is about heart rate, why it's increasing, why it might be higher than it usually is. Or if you just go out for a run and you've always said, I just have a higher heart rate, here are the reasons why, okay? So if you're always running without any kind of hydration, change that and see if that helps because of that thermoregulation, okay? These are all aspects into what could be beneficial to help lower that heart rate. Another aspect with the hydration is that if you feel parched or if you're not getting enough fluid, then you don't have enough water to produce the sweat that you need to cool that body temperature, that internal core temperature down, okay? So the levels of electrolytes like sodium, potassium, they're going to change while you're dehydrated, and that's going to interfere with your heart rate as well, okay? Some people always refer to cramping as a lack of electrolytes. Well, that cramping could come into play because you're also losing an important substrate, which is carbohydrates, okay? So water helps with all of this, okay? Dehydration will also negatively affect your mood and just the cognitive functions, your ability to process, your ability to just maintain what you're doing, okay? It's also going to create some low blood pressure. It's going to raise your heart rate, okay? So if you feel that headache, if you feel that rapid heart rate, if you feel an increase in fatigue, chances are dehydration is playing a part. Here's another fun one, altitude, okay? Have you ever noticed a difference when you go to a different city maybe? Chances are that level that you're at from an altitude standpoint has potentially changed, okay? So it is very important to take that into effect. It can create a lot of negative training effects, especially if you don't acclimate to it and then you just go out and do the exact same thing that you have been doing, okay? So when you're at a high altitude area, you might notice that heart rate and your breathing are faster compared to the lower elevations. All right, this is because the oxygen levels are lower at altitude. What does this mean? Well, it's because the heart and lungs have to work harder to get enough oxygen to the organs and tissues, okay? So breathing, heart rate being faster. Okay, think about that. That's because the heart is working so much harder, okay? So there's a lot of debate on how much time you need to fully acclimate. It's weeks. It's not days, it's weeks. So if you go to a high altitude area that you're not used to for a race and you get there 2 days before, that's not enough time to acclimate. Okay, so all of the training leading up to that needs to be appropriately done to plan for it, okay? Also, if you wear an altitude mask and you only wear it 1 or 2 hours a day while you're training, that's not the same, okay? The best effect of those masks are wearing them the majority of your day, which the majority of people will not do. So one thing we recommend, if you have the ability to do it, is to go to those higher elevation locations and start training there. Along with travel, we get terrain, okay? So another big aspect is changing terrain. If you're used to only running on sidewalks and pretty flat like Houston, and then you go somewhere that has a much hillier area. Let's say you take a trip to Austin, or you go to Colorado, or you go, anywhere that has the hills and that type of terrain, it's going to affect your heart rate, okay? So even if you are taking it easy, your heart rate most likely is going to increase. This plays a role due to the muscles that you're using are very different, and they're going to be different than if you were just running on a straight flat road or sidewalk or track, okay? Same thing with cyclists. When you adjust where that terrain is, different muscle groups are going to come into play. They've always been working, but maybe not to the degree that they will, okay? This is your hip flexors, hamstrings, your calves, all of that. They're going to do more work to stabilize, if you're going uphill, if you're going over a rocky terrain, anything like that. So all that additional output is going to raise your heart rate as well. Lastly, we really want to talk about other health issues that might be going on. So whenever we have an athlete or an individual that does testing with us or inquires about a higher heart rate, we always want to make sure that you're getting checked out as well, okay? So anemia, high blood pressure, pregnancy, hyperthyroidism, if you have the remnants of the effects of COVID, any other heart conditions can come into play. So if you have, what you would consider maybe an abnormally high heart rate and a very low resting heart rate, there's a chance that some things could be going on outside of just, general training and what we just discussed, okay? Now, if you have a really high resting heart rate, that counter effect is going to be a high training heart rate. But again, having a high heart rate is not just something to blow off, okay? Your heart rate is high for a reason. Your heart is having to work hard to pump blood to the system, okay? So it is definitely important to make sure that you identify certain things going on, okay? So we always recommend, if you are concerned, we're not going to be able to see specific things during the testing, so it is good to go get checked out just to be safe. So let's talk about a couple warning signs about that high heart rate. So experiencing a significantly high heart rate when running, cycling, or doing any kind of exercise, you'll probably notice some other effects going on other than the heart rate. So we would want to make sure that if you're feeling a shortness of breath or chest discomfort, irregular heartbeats even, if you're nauseous, if you're feeling really lightheaded, and what we definitely want to avoid is any kind of passing out. But if you notice any of those signs or symptoms, you need to take a break. You need to stop running, stop cycling, stop swimming, walk, or just rest, okay? And make sure you have hydration with you, all right? So taking a break is fine, but if your body and your core temperature is so high and you're not giving it water to help cool it down and help with that thermal regulation, you're not going to be able to recover how you need to, okay? So if you experience any of those symptoms, I do highly recommend seeking that medical attention just in case. How do you lower your heart rate? That's going to be the second factor here, okay? And then our next video, our next long form video, we're going to talk about this. But the easiest way to lower your heart rate is just to reduce the intensity, okay? That's a big one. Instead of sprinting up the hills, just walk the hills. Instead of doing super high interval sets, just lower it a little bit, okay? Taking that active recovery during the workout. If you do an interval and you don't let yourself recover before doing another interval, all you're doing is just pushing that anaerobic system, which is going to increase that heart rate, okay? You're also going to lose that substrate, which is carbohydrates. So all in all, with those factors going into play, if you're increasing intensity, if you're lacking the substrate carbohydrate to let that muscle work, if you don't have the hydration with you, the goal workout probably will not be efficient or effective due to, just lacking all of that and seeing that increase in heart rate. And if you ignore all of that, chances are your training is going to go in the opposite direction, okay? So we have some videos on that as well. How do you lower your heart rate? That's going to be the second factor here, okay? And then our next video, our next long form video, we're going to talk about this. But the easiest way to lower your heart rate is just to reduce the intensity, okay? That's a big one. Instead of sprinting up the hills, just walk the hills. Instead of doing super high interval sets, just lower it a little bit, okay? Taking that active recovery during the workout. If you do an interval and you don't let yourself recover before doing another interval, all you're doing is just pushing that anaerobic system, which is going to increase that heart rate, okay? You're also going to lose that substrate, which is carbohydrates. So all in all, with those factors going into play, if you're increasing intensity, if you're lacking the substrate carbohydrate to let that muscle work, if you don't have the hydration with you, the goal workout probably will not be efficient or effective due to, just lacking all of that and seeing that increase in heart rate. And if you ignore all of that, chances are your training is going to go in the opposite direction, okay? So we have some videos on that as well. If you're somebody that chugs a ton of caffeine before you go run, I would moderate that at the same time, okay? There's a lot of research out there, and we'll list some, but there's research out there that shows that if you do actual low zone 2, that very, very conservative aerobic training, in time, you should see that heart rate drop. Your resting heart rate will drop, and then your training heart rate should drop as well. If you are totally neglecting these important training zones and just guessing where they are, chances are you're overworking. That overworking is going to, play a role in overtraining, stress, increased fatigue. All of the above that we talked about is going to come into play if you're ignoring the training zones and getting them accurately assessed. Your watch is just a guess, okay? Our remote protocol, which the link is below, you can get it today. You could get it right now if you wanted. You can do this protocol from anywhere. Runners, you just need a GPS watch. Cyclists, you just need wattage, or you can use Zwift on the bike. So it's totally up to you, but we highly recommend identifying exactly where those training zones are and where the heart rate is to be associated with it. This is going to help avoid the overtraining. It's going to help avoid the guessing. It's going to help avoid underfueling. You will get the caloric information with this as well, okay? So it's very, very important to make sure if you notice an extremely high heart rate, your high heart rate is there for a reason, okay? We can train it to get lower, But if you just keep pounding that high heart rate, something is going on. All right. Please reach out if you have any questions at all. We're going to post some shorter form videos about this so that it's much easier to digest. Links below, contact us below if you're interested in figuring out exactly what your training zones are, what those heart rates are, what the caloric information is as well. We are here to help, okay? If you have a coach, we will work with